But remember to click like and subscribe on YouTube a month on early and me is really Thanks for watching and listening to the Nomiki Show. But remember to click like and subscribe on YouTube and please share on social media. If you're not already a patron, please join us for as low as $5 a month on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show for early and special content. That investment makes a huge difference. We are not corporate media raking in the dough. It's really you guys that are keeping us going. So please consider being a patron. And to our current patrons, thank you so much. We are incredibly grateful to you. We also now have swag. So check us out on thenomikishow.com to get your mugs, your totes, and your stickers.
Welcome to the Nomiki Show. I am Nomiki Konst. What a difference a weekend makes. We are now 42 days away from the election date, and in the last 4 days, the entire course of history will undoubtedly be shifted because of the last 3 days. And in those 42 days, potentially we have less until the election if we see Donald Trump able to ramp up a Supreme Court nomination through the Senate faster than ever before in American history. In every generation, there are moments of choice. And throughout the course of human history, there have been moments of consequence determined by a few moments of choice. How you answer the question, which side are you on, that's what matters. This will stick with you for the rest of your life. This is such a moment. A moment we will look back on history and say, that's when we started to turn things around from the fascism that was built in the last 4 years. Or this is a moment when we failed to use our hard-fought-for right to vote, especially for such moments. And it all went badly, badly wrong. Moments when we use our vote as a protection for the most vulnerable in society, to preserve whatever semblance of rights we have right now, free speech, to organize the ACA, to fight against the destruction of our limited path to change, to fight for the ability to expand that path. This is one of those moments. RBG is gone. Her death did not create this moment, but her death has brought into stark view what is at stake in this election. On her tiny frame, she carried us a very long way forward, not perfect, but a long way forward. And now it is on us to carry her work forward and preserve whatever is semblance, partial, potential progress in the future over the protection of rights that we have, all for the future. And to set up the future of the Supreme Court through reform, potentially, and maybe even a few seats that we could gain for future generations. That is what is on the line. Neoliberals love saying it's about the right to choose in that Supreme Court. It is much more right now. It's about fighting fascism. It is about putting up an actual resistance to Trump, and this is the greatest form of resistance, using your hard-earned vote to fight that off, to win the Senate. Remember her dying wish, RBG's dying wish, was that her replacement would be appointed by the next president. That could happen before the election, and the outcome could potentially decide the election if the Biden campaign does not do its job. The Biden campaign, we talked about this in the Majority Report just a few minutes ago. The Biden campaign made a very conscious decision to appeal to centrist Republican voters. It was a danger because it's not like it was to expand the base. It was essentially in exchange for the base, thinking the base is going to show up in the face of fascism no matter what to fight Trump. 200,000 deaths in America, in the United States, from the effects of COVID, from COVID. That's where we are right now. And Biden, in some ways, rightfully thinks that is enough to fight Trump. Trump declaring New York City, Portland, Seattle, anarchist cities so that he can defund those cities. so that he can amp up police, militarized police in those cities, and potentially in a neighborhood near you. That is what is on the line right now. Our vote that has been expanded, that has been fought for with blood, tears, sweat. We know our history. That is our resistance right now. It is about fascism. It is about the courts being decided. And if Biden, let me make this very clear, if Biden does not amp up the base and the excitement in the next 42 days, actually even earlier, right now, then it could be so close that the Supreme Court does decide this election. But that is only if it gets that close. David Axelrod said it so well right after 2016, when everyone started throwing out allegations against millennials, against Bernie supporters, against Russia, whoever it was. And David Axelrod said, in the days after the election, it should have never been so close. The entire Trump strategy is about slicing away a little bit here, a little bit there, bringing in Kanye into the race and whoever else to try to split up the vote, to sow confusion and sadness. And what's happening is that it's death by 1,000 cuts, right? Death by 1,000 cuts. If you're confused, if you're angry at the Democrats, it's easier to be angry at the Democrats because we know that space so well, because we fought that space for the last, several years. We fought neoliberalism, and that is to Trump's gain because he wants to deplete enthusiasm on the Democratic side. And Joe Biden really is not doing enough to fight back against that right now. So if you want to defeat fascism, it's about enthusiasm. We're in a really tough spot with the Senate right now. Let's roll that clip. Dorsey, can we put that clip up of Mitt Romney and what he announced today?
I recognize that we may have a court which has more of a conservative bent than it's had over the last few decades. But my liberal friends have, over many decades, gotten very used to the idea of having a liberal court. And that's not written in the stars. I recognize.
So there you have it. Mitt Romney, who likes to pretend don't forget, this is the Republican nominee in 2012 against Barack Obama, who fought against the Affordable Care Act, even though he passed something similar in Massachusetts. These people do not play by the rules, and we know it. So let's stop pretending like we are fighting people who play by the rules. They are trying to get a conservative justice. And so suddenly all of those centrist voters who were fighting fascism now see a conservative justice as a path forward with Trump. So Mitt Romney, or John Kasich for all we know, John Kasich, a conservative, a religious, anti-abortion conservative, may now be siding with the base of the Republican Party because it comes down to a justice. That's what's on the line when Joe Biden decides to sell out progressives and excitement for a few votes. It might be slice and dice on the Republican side. That might be their strategy, but it should not be for us. We really do have to have a big tent. We really do have to have that enthusiasm so that we do not get to a point where justices, conservative justices are determining the outcome of this election. A Supreme Court is determining the outcome of this election. Donald Trump, every time we show up on the streets, Donald Trump now says rule of law. And he's using it as an opportunity to use the power he has to suppress our voices, our vote, our message, and make a statement about us so that he can excite his base. What is Joe Biden doing? This shouldn't be about calling out the Republicans and their hypocrisy. This should be about showing the entire population what is on the line. It is much more now about our anger towards neoliberals. This is about the small path that we have in fighting fascism. But if we don't use our vote, our power, this moment, that path could be eliminated forever. I wish that this was just, rhetoric, and this was a way, and I was using fear tactics, but the reality is that if you look at history, these are the moments that it comes down to. So I mean, I really don't know what else to say right now other than the fact that we have to be doing all we can in our power to, people ask me, like, what should I do right now? I'm really angry at the Democrats. I feel you. I mean, the Democrats went after me personally. I personally get it. I am angry too. So I'm using my power right now to make phone calls for people like Marquita Bradshaw in Tennessee, a state that used to be a Democratic state, to get back Al Gore's U.S. Senate seat. Some people are making calls for people in who can win back the Senate. Some folks are making calls for DAs. Some folks are calling for state Senate races so that we can fight back gerrymandering, as we are in the middle of a census and we're going to have redistricting very soon. We have to use all of the tools available right now because this is about something much, much bigger than our anger at neoliberals, which, let me tell you, if we have a neoliberal in the White House, or a neoliberal as coming from a state, New York State, where a neoliberal is our governor, he moves on things because progressives, which he relies on to win, shine a light on his hypocrisy. But that is only because we don't have a Republican as a governor and we have a Democrat. So we have to make sure to preserve the path that we have open for protest. And if you don't feel comfortable making calls for Biden, I hear you. Make calls for other folks because that will build the excitement. And Biden campaign, if this wasn't a wake-up call to get that base energized and excited and stop focusing on those unreliable, disloyal Republicans who could shift back over to the Republican Party in one move, then this is that wake-up call. This is the wake-up call. We have a very good show today. I'm excited because we're going to be talking with an MMT economist. She is an associate professor of economics at Bard College. Her name is Pavlina Tcherneva. She is the author of the book, The Case for a Jobs Guarantee. And later up, we have in our panel, we're going to be talking about the news of the day, Akela Lacy, who is a politics reporter at The Intercept, and Napoleon DeLegend. He's back. He's back. All right, stick around. We'll be back right after the break.
Thanks for watching and listening to The Nomiki Show. But remember to click like and subscribe on YouTube, and please share on social media. If you're not already a patron, please join us for as low as $5 a month on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show for early and special content. That investment makes a huge difference. We are not corporate media raking in the dough. It's really you guys that are keeping us going. So please consider being a patron. And to our current patrons, thank you so much. We are incredibly grateful to you. We also now have swag. So check us out on thenomikishow.com to get your mugs, your totes, and your stickers.
Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. I am Nomiki Konst, and we are very excited because we talk about MMT a lot on our show, and I think what excites me about MMT is not just this completely, it's making its way in the mainstream now, but it is about switching perspectives. And I'm really excited that this book has come out. Pavlina Tcherneva, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, is an associate professor of economics at Bard College and a research scholar at the Levy Economic Institute in New York. She specializes in modern monetary theory, and she's a frequent speaker at central banks on MMT. She's the author of The Case for a Jobs Guarantee. Pavlina, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm equally excited to be here.
So, Pavlina, I think let's just start off with, for those who may not be familiar with MMT, what is the idea of MMT?
MMT is a perspective that allows us to understand public budgeting policy better and just the monetary system. I mean, we start from a simple proposition that the cash in your pockets, the currency is a monopoly of the federal government. And so even on the face of it, if you have a monopoly of what everyone desires, there's no limit to which you can use it, right? You can issue the currency for whatever public purpose we have deemed as important. So what we say is that we've got to use the public purse for the public good. And from then we proceed to understand how the monetary system works, provide some new perspectives, and specifically say, hey, look, this narrative that we've been told for centuries, not centuries, but certainly decades, that we don't have money to pay for the public good is just not true.
Now, what I love about the case for the jobs guarantee is you're turning this idea into policy. So it's going from being an economic theory to an actual policy that can be passed through Congress, hopefully, if we win. So let's, what is the jobs guarantee?
Well, the job guarantee is a very straightforward proposal that if somebody needs work, decent, well-paid work, and they've not been able to find it for whatever reason, the public sector has the responsibility to provide it. And it is connected to MMT because for a couple of reasons. And the first is that private firms are not in the business of employing everyone. I think that should be intuitive. We see that happening even when we're not in the midst of a pandemic. We understand that the public sector is responsible for unemployment, and it has to address all the fallout from unemployment. And so there is really a straightforward solution. If somebody needs a job, we can provide it. But there is also a little tweak there to the MMT perspective that is often ignored, and that, the federal government imposes taxes. You see, we can't really avoid them. We got to pay license fees, driver's licenses. We've got to pay all sorts of obligations that we can't avoid. And so what we say in MMT is we say when there is that kind of obligation in terms of currency that the government controls, and the government hasn't provided it adequately so people can make ends meet and just meet the very basics of lives, then the public sector has abrogated this important responsibility to use the public purse to allow people to fulfill their non-reciprocal obligations, but also to build a good life.
Okay, so is this, maybe I'm not getting this right, but is it essentially there's a potential path for a jobs guarantee, whether it's jobs through the Green New Deal or infrastructure improvements, but also a UBI attached to that?
Well, it could be. I mean, the job guarantee is somewhat separate from the basic income proposal because it addresses a very particular problem. That rain or shine, we've got people who need work. They would like to work. And it's not just because they lack income. I think this is reasonably well established that, of course, income helps. And many people's lives can be improved by providing income support, the retired, for example, children, etc. But there is this very specific problem. People seeking work for a great many reasons. And they are not able to find it. And the public sector at the same time has so many tasks that go unfulfilled. There are so many gaps in our public services. And so we can really marry these two problems, public squalor, if you will, and folks who are seeking work. And so if the private sector is not in the business of employing everyone, and in the public sector is, then we should be putting our resources, our human potential to solving some specific problems that affect us all in the community. So whether that is environmental cleanup, whether that is, some infrastructure, care, we can talk about the kind of jobs we need, but there's plenty to do. And so that's not the only way we build a good life, obviously. There are many other ways in which we self-determine, we organize our lives. So I always say that the job guarantee needs to be situated within a broader perspective of what an adequate welfare support system needs to be. And that would include income support, certainly. But in the absence of a job guarantee, just income support is not enough.
Agreed. So the number one employment job force in America is the health sector. And one of the pieces that our enemies against Medicare for All like to state is, this is why would you want to disrupt the number one employment industry in this country by instituting Medicare for All, which could potentially take years to enable courts being tied up in courts, and it would cause a lot of dysfunction, yada, yada, yada. But alternatively, what you're saying is it would be more secure, potentially, that, having a Medicare for All system would actually protect these jobs even more.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many important points in this question. I mean, the first thing is that we have connected healthcare to jobs, and that just on its own needs to be, that link has to be severed, and Medicare has to be, healthcare has to be guaranteed as a basic human right. But that argument, you see, it's a pretty powerful argument. You can't reform the healthcare system because jobs will be lost. And you see, we apply this to all sorts of things. You know, you can't remove the fossil fuel producers from our community because that will cause us jobs. We can't shut down the local prison because that will cause us jobs. And you see, the jobs, the fear of losing one's jobs is always held over our heads and has prevented us from moving forward with reforms that are sensible, that really restructure the economy in a more balanced and sustainable way. So I think that the job guarantee is that promise, that needed piece in the safety net that says, look, we can actually embark on bold structural changes because we have a safety net, because we have put in place this minimum condition that whoever loses employment, they will be secured living wage job in this program, and we will do whatever we can to help them transition to the new economy, to the green economy, to a better to better employment opportunities.
But I mean, in the health sector jobs, those are jobs tied to your healthcare. But the health sector is the largest job force in America. So if it, and you have, you know, hospitals all over the country being privatized, they're cutting hours, they're not putting benefits in. I mean, we've seen the stories where you have nurses who are taking care of COVID patients and they don't even have insurance themselves. Well, I shouldn't say it, not nurses, but healthcare workers. Nurses are forced to. It's having it instituted under the government alone, this market alone would put more protections in place so people wouldn't be losing their jobs. Not to mention, as you said, putting folks out there to do cleanups and infrastructure support. So what other jobs, are you, would be put, what are like the top tier jobs you think should be campaigned on around a jobs guarantee?
So I think I want to separate first the job creation that was necessary to accomplish some very concrete strategic goals. Mm-hmm. So we need to put in place large-scale infrastructure. We need to do, we need to fortify the public sector. I mean, we have gutted it for decades and decades. We have, federal agencies that are understaffed, whether it is the CDC, the FDA. I mean, we need to do a lot. The jobs guarantee goal is to provide transition safety net, unemployment safety net. And so then the question is, what kind of work shall we put folks to do? And so, my preference would be to strengthen the public sector to employ at all levels, at all skill levels as needed. But at the end of the day, we know how market economies work. Folks will still need work, and they won't be able, even what we might consider lower skill folks, and I really don't like this term very much because low skill folks are extremely essential and they have proven to be so critical in this time, and they're underpaid and they are undervalued. And so what we need is basically a floor that supports their wages. And so what kind of work will we employ folks to do? It will be work in the public for the public purpose. I think green jobs lend themselves very nicely to this program. I think the job guarantee, even from the New Deal era, was a green jobs guarantee. I mean, we did all sorts of conservation back then. And now we are trying to breathe a new life in the conservation movement. I mean, I think the conservation movement is actually has done a tremendous amount of work, but breathe a new life in the climate urgency. And so while California is being incinerated and fires are burning on the West Coast, and while we're experiencing floods on an ongoing basis in the Midwest and seeing hurricanes, we are actually experiencing problems that are unattended to. Yeah. So the job guarantee can be that standby, if you will, labor force that on demand can address some of these urgent problems. But they can be also small projects, community projects. I think, I always ask people, look around. What would you like to see in your community that's not being done? Do you have care needs? Are your kids in need of after-school activities? Do we have unemployed teachers? What about the healthcare sector? Even though it is the largest employer, as you said, and we are still underpaying healthcare workers, at the same time, we lack some very basic preventative care service. So imagine, we had community health clinics, and we would, those will be permanent, but imagine if we provided kind of on-the-job training folks who could shadow nurses, folks who could shadow teachers, who could get the kind of, apprenticeships for young folks. So I think there really isn't a shortage of work that we can do. It's just that our thinking is not there yet, that the public sector has a responsibility, has done this quite effectively. We've seen, in our own history, but also around the world. And it's time to kind of embrace the direct solution, employ the unemployed.
So in terms of how we push forward the jobs guarantee through legislation, I mean, where are we right now? Who in the Democratic Party is warming up to this idea?
I mean, if you recall last year in the presidential cycle, there are a number of folks who were talking about the job guarantee, starting with my own Senator Kirsten Gillibrand right here. But then there were a number of folks who embraced a form of a job guarantee, from Cory Booker to Elizabeth Warren, and Bernie Sanders had the boldest, I think, proposal in his platform as part of the green transition. Now, today there are some legislative efforts that are being made. Representative Bonnie Watson-Coleman has a proposal that she's working on, and there are others that are in the pipeline. Now, what is encouraging is that people are starting to turn to this idea that, first, folks who need work, there is really no good reason that we cannot provide work. And number two, if folks need work, there is no reason why we should be providing poverty-paying jobs. So if we have a job guarantee, that's the standard. That's the minimum standard that any job needs to meet. So in terms of the politics of the job guarantee, there seems to be appetite also internationally, but it is still a little bit on the margins, I have to admit, though the program has been polled and is very popular. Mm-hmm. It's very popular in the United States. It was polled recently in the UK. So, giving jobs to folks is not, terribly partisan issue.
In terms of unions, you have public sector unions. You think that they would be very much in favor of a jobs guarantee. Where are they on this?
Well, I mean, that's a little bit of a complicated question. I think that we have had somewhat not tense relationship historically. Unions, for example, had mixed feelings about the New Deal. But in the end, right, FDR said, look, we're going to take union input, and we'd like to know, we'd like to support unions. We want to have an economy that offers strong unionized jobs. But at the same time, we also want to provide employment relief. Mm-hmm. So I don't see these as antagonistic. In fact, I think that we have a common mission. What is union work in conditions of mass unemployment? It's extremely difficult. It is extremely difficult to negotiate the rights of workers when you are faced with the threat of unemployment. And I think on that front, I think that as a baseline scenario, we want all to eradicate unemployment as a perennial feature. On the other hand, I have seen a lot of sympathy and a lot of support today from service unions. And I think the reason is because service sector jobs no longer promise the kind of well-paid manufacturing jobs that we once saw. And so we need to find another structural solution for this precarity in the labor market. And the job guarantee is this other policy tool that we haven't really employed for a long time that says, hey, every single person is going to have a basic job with basic benefits. And then we will do what we can to then transition folks into specialized industry, specialized work, unionized work. But in my work, I argue that folks in the job guarantee certainly can and should unionize to lobby for their own conditions and advocate for their own working conditions.
All right. So say this election, Biden, we win back the Senate, we win the presidency. Knock on wood. Hopefully, who knows at this point. Who do we need to lobby?
Well, we certainly have to lobby the president and members of Congress. I always like that line from FDR, make me do it. Yeah. And what FDR had accomplished in a few short years was the result of years of community building, of advocacy, of activism, of coalition building. And so I think that has been to some degree happening in the background. And I think that that powerful force needs to exert pressure certainly on the president to put in place these programs. I think that we are slowly embracing the direct job creation solution. What I am a little more concerned about is that suppose we have Biden presidency and we do embark on a $2 trillion green infrastructure investment program, and that's all well and good, and we do a whole lot of things that are good for working people. If we don't also put in place a job guarantee, I worry that we will have, a decade of robust, strong growth, kind of like the new golden age, the way we had one after World War II. But then if we don't put in place the employment safety net, little by little, there will always be folks who will be left out of work. And that will always be folks on the margins. There will be people of color. Those will be, young folks. And if we accept an economy that does not guarantee jobs for all, we are at the same time asking the question, who should be the people that don't have those jobs? And we want to end once and for all, or to the best of our ability, this kind of cruel game of musical chairs.
Fascinating book. I think this is the time. If there's any time to be talking about this, it is this moment. It is The Case for a Job Guarantee by Pavlina Tcherneva. Thank you for writing this. Thank you for coming on. And hopefully, after the new year, in February, we can have a conversation about next steps.
Thank you, Naomi. It was great to be Nomiki, to be on your show.
Thanks, Pavlina. Take care. Up next, we have our panel talking about today's news. We have Akela Lacy and Napoleon de Legend, the notorious Napoleon de Legend. That is up next on The Nomiki Show.
Thanks for watching and listening to The Nomiki Show. But remember to click like and subscribe on YouTube, and please share on social media. If you're not already a patron, please join us for as low as $5 a month on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show for early and special content. That investment makes a huge difference. We are not corporate media raking in the dough. It's really you guys that are keeping us going. So please consider being a patron. And to our current patrons, thank you so much. We are incredibly grateful to you. We also now have swag. So check us out on thenomikishow.com to get your mugs, your totes, and your stickers.
Welcome back to The Nomiki Show. I'm excited about our next panel. We have reoccurring TNS guest, Napoleon de Legend. You know him from the Michael Brooks Show. He, of course, is a musician. He's an Afrobeat hip-hop artist. He's a Brooklyn-based artist, of course, and his song Black Privilege led to his being featured in the Essence Festival in 2017. Welcome back. And then we have Akela Lacy. She's a politics reporter with The Intercept. She covers politics. I'm sure you guys have read her pieces. She's fun on Twitter. Thanks for joining the show.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me.
So today, this is our first day back from the weekend. We start our show on Tuesdays. And of course, RBG passed away on Friday. And the entire... It's like there was a shift, a seismic shift, like there was a massive earthquake in terms of maybe the course of history. And while I think a lot of us are rightfully thinking about the future course of history, we shouldn't forget that she helped deliver a vote on Roe v. Wade, or not, excuse me, she stood for Roe v. Wade. And then she was there, fighting for women's right to choose. And of course, she herself being an advocate for women. Now Trump, of course, has said that he wants to appoint a judge that is a woman who is of a much more conservative background. And it looks like that judge, based on the vote count right now, potential vote count right now, will be brought forward. So I just want to start off, maybe Akela, you're a reporter, you cover politics. What does it seem like? How can Democrats, progressives, anybody who is in opposition to whoever Trump nominates, if it's a woman, a conservative woman, how do they challenge this choice without going down a rabbit hole which basically divides us as we lead up to an election? Meaning, a conservative woman versus a conservative Brett Kavanaugh.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard for people to not feel hopeless because we watched something very similar to this happen in 2016, and obviously Merrick Garland was not allowed to move forward. And so when you're talking about, how women are going to feel just because there's a wanting to fuel further divisiveness when this is arguably the most, important election in our lifetime, it's important to remember the facts that are at stake here, that even if Trump picks a woman, that woman could very well be someone like Amy Coney Barrett, who's at the top of the list right now, who has been very clear that she's in favor of introducing further restrictions, which is, of course there's a partisan aspect to that issue, but at the end of the day, particularly when we're in such an unstable social environment, women and families should be able to make decisions about how they want to plan or bring people into the world that we're currently living in, and that shouldn't be a partisan issue. But I think if people can stay to talking about those issues and educating people around them, encouraging people to vote, which is the lowest bar that you could possibly do right now. But keeping that in mind, that what's at stake is actually not a political issue. It's an issue.
Akela, we're losing you a little bit. So maybe we can work on that when we go to the next question. But Napoleon, I think what she just said, Akela just said, in terms of this is really about something much more. Today is National Voter Registration Day, and I started off my opening, I basically scrapped what I was thinking initially, and I just wanted to talk about the importance of a vote as a tool, as a weapon against fascism right now. And, in the last few days, we suddenly went from potentially winning this election based on a wave with conservative, centrist Republicans to now being in a situation where it's about excitement. And if we get close, the courts could decide our election. How are you taking this? When you talk to activists out there and they're rightfully frustrated, how are you able to message that it's about the Supreme Court, it's about the future, it's about preservation of our current rights? What are you thinking?
Well, I think the fact her death also reminds us that it is about, judges are so important and they have to factor into that decision, and there's the down ballot and everything like that. And I often think that a lot of the people that I speak to, they usually minimize their elections to just the presidential candidates. So it's and they want to, they want to be in love with who they vote for, but that's not really it's not really how it works, and that's not really what it's about. And it's an easy thing to do, to vote. We have the right to vote. We should definitely, that's the minimum of what we should do. And what I think about RBG, I always get these confused in my head, is that it's the same way they weaponize people by race and everything like that, where they'll take somebody like a Tim Scott or take a Candace Owens, and they'll be like, look, there's black people that feel like that, so they're going to use a woman in order to try to overturn Roe v. Wade. And it's a very insidious tactic, but very smart on their part, No,
that's smart. It's it all comes down to tactics, and there's so much to fight right now that we have to be strategic about what we fight at what times. And I think that does come back to the vote. It's okay, we may not like Biden. I'm sure none of us here do love him in any way, but the tactic is to fight off the potential of more rights being stripped away from us. We have a housing crisis that we're in the midst of, and we don't even really have a sense of the numbers right now because there's eviction moratoriums across this country, state by state, and also there's a federal one. But, entrepreneurs, they like to see an opportunity wherever they can. The gig economy found a new market in evictions. In case you forgot that our commodified housing system and the exploitation of workforce go hand in hand, yesterday Vice ran an article about the rise of a company called Civil, which touts the opportunity to work on an eviction crew as the fastest money-making gig due to COVID. As people around the country face housing insecurity with no real aid from the government, other people facing economic hardship now have a chance to find work evicting them. Just to put this in perspective, there was a story done a few days ago on New Yorkers being evicted or leaving their houses. I mean, evicted for reasons that they can, there was a little slice of time where New York reached their deadline and the federal eviction did not, CDC hadn't ruled on that yet. And people were out on the streets bringing friends to protect their items out on the streets from other people coming in and taking them, because companies go into the homes and just pull the stuff out and put it on the streets. Akela, what is there any real effort being made right now at a local level by lawmakers, Democratic lawmakers that you know of, to protect folks, to make sure that there is an actual cancellation of rent? Because people are either going to be evicted because there's a deadline, or they're evicted because they're $20,000, $30,000 potentially late on their rent.
As far as canceling rent, no, there's no indication to my knowledge that is like a valid. Oh, is it still cutting out a little bit?
A little bit. It's okay. Keep going.
Okay. There's no indication to me that there is like a viable proposal to actually make that happen. Anywhere locally, some states have made the decision to put a moratorium on evictions, but we're still seeing people like on an individual case by case basis being threatened by their landlords or being evicted anyway. So I mean, I've been covering the housing protest in Philly that's going on with the homeless encampments there. And local officials are working to try to get immediate housing for the people in those camps, but they've been in conversations for the last few months that haven't really been going anywhere. Proposing plans that don't necessarily address the issue of where are they going to house these 120 people tomorrow if they do end up evicting the camps. So it's unfortunate. People are talking past each other and saying that they're trying to work with advocates, but they're actually proposing things that don't really get to the core issue, which is people are facing immediate evictions and, on a nightly basis do not have a place to go, particularly because shelters have been at capacity and also unsafe in the pandemic.
Unsafe on the pandemic because folks have to be held in these shelters. And I mean, in New York, I can only speak to New York, but they're being pulled out of shelters and moved to different locations because you have folks in progressive neighborhoods who don't want shelters in their own neighborhoods. I mean, this is the Upper West Side conundrum. Napoleon, I mean, how are activists, why do you think the activism is not working right now? I mean, you talk about strategy all the time. I love these conversations we have, but folks are showing up on the streets. Folks are protesting their Democratic lawmakers. Folks are trying to influence the progressive senators and legislatures around the country. And yet, we're frozen. Nothing's happening.
I mean, I think it's a system it's a symptom of the system that we're living in. It's like I think that the whole system have to be relooked and overhauled, because especially when you think about a business like Civil, when these types of businesses start popping up and start thriving, I think it's time to we have to really sound the alarm. Like there's something truly wrong. And it reminds me of the payday loan type businesses. They suck the blood out of the most destitute people in the society we live in. Yeah. And just the fact that, I mean, when are the second round of stimulus checks coming? We need that at the very least. And I think the Democratic Party, has to step up to the plate, but they seem to be so beholden by their donors that none of this necessary action is taking place, and them helping out and doing something would actually excite some voters to want to vote them in even more. And I think it's like a full circle. That's the whole problem. It's just they're not listening. There's a problem, and the people in positions are not listening to us.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, it comes down to donors, but on the alternate side, it's how much public pressure is it going to take? How many people need to show up on the streets? How many phone calls do you have to make for them to actually move? And they're frozen, like you said. They're frozen because of their donors who, they've relied on to get elected. And there's only so many progressives in office. So another story just showing how frustrated folks are getting. Healthcare workers are on strike in Chicago right now. On Saturday, 800 nurses from the Illinois Nurses Association went on strike at the University of Illinois Chicago Hospital, marking the first such strike action taken by UIC members of the group in 46 years. These healthcare workers organized the action in order to win adequate staffing levels, decent wages, and adequate PPE in Illinois, a state controlled by Democrats. We have two big takeaways here. One, the gutting of our healthcare system under neoliberal leadership was always in danger. But in the context of a pandemic, it could spell out far more widespread suffering. Years of bipartisan refusal to fully fund supplies and facilities before COVID for the healthcare workers, to pay those workers non-poverty wages, and to create enough of these jobs for fully staffed ships have gotten us here. This leads us to our next takeaway, which is when healthcare's win, we win. When these workers are given enough shifts to make a decent living and support their coworkers in the job, we make sure that no patient has to wait for care. So COVID exacerbated partially the crisis in this country caused by Trump, facilitated by neoliberals, and it's amazing to see these healthcare workers organize. Akela, I mean, do you see any other stuff like this happening around the country where workers are organizing and pushing back against the systemic issues that have gotten us to this point?
Absolutely, yeah, and particularly among nurses. I mean, we've covered. There were several nurses at hospitals in California that were, and in New York that were basically like whistleblowing about conditions in the hospital, being not given access to PPE, being asked to reuse masks when they were aware of additional supplies at the hospital, being forced to put themselves and their patients at risk. Actually, a colleague of mine, Matthew Cunningham Cook, reported last week that in North Carolina, 1,800 nurses in Asheville won the state's first union at a private hospital ever, and they ended up joining National Nurses United. So we are definitely seeing, even when Congress has Congress's inability to address this issue hasn't stopped people from continuing to try to use people power to bring these issues to the forefront, but also bargain for power for themselves in the workplace. And so we're seeing that over and over again, even on smaller scales. Like it's being replicated, from coast to coast, which is sad that we're putting people in this position where they have to risk their employment or their status to be able to bargain for those rights, but they are winning in a lot of them. And as we're seeing in as with the ongoing protests and discussing issues of police brutality, when lawmakers aren't responding, what continues to put pressure on them is the fact that people are in the streets or, people are continuing to organize. So it's always coming back to that like when everyone has given up, individuals are the ones continuing to do the work.
And it really does come, the power of a strike. So on one hand, you have folks showing up in the streets, making phone calls. Sometimes that pressures folks, sometimes it doesn't. But when you have a union that decides strategically to strike, which is a huge decision, this hasn't happened in 46 years in Illinois, that's what gets people to fold. So Napoleon, obviously unions have been weakened in the last 40 years. But strategically, where do you think we are not pushing far enough?
Well, I think that should be another point that the Democrats could use, like for the election. It's like get behind movements like that, highlight movements like that to show that look, this will only get worse, and this has happened. And also, I don't know, maybe they think that it happened under their watch too, because the fact that it was underfunded is a part of the problem of the whole system. But we need to go back to planning the economy. Something like healthcare has to be, I don't think it could work being a privatized system efficiently anyways. And it's been proven not to work. And it's great to see people are like rallying towards these causes. And it's going to continue to happen and when people are stretched thin and have nothing left, they're just going to, take it to the streets and just like, look, I don't want to work in these conditions anymore. But I think it's an opportunity, once again, that's missed for the people higher up and for the Biden campaign and everything, and people that are running to excite people and to show people that we are for you and we are behind you. And in the words of Harvey K, let's make America radical again. and by just taking our own power and really put pressure on these people to tell them that, look, the way the status quo is just hasn't worked, and COVID only made it worse.
That's right. But that ultimately brings back to the original point, which is, so if they're unwilling, you have these movements all around. You have unions that support Democrats, that support neoliberals because they're depending on funding and budgets, pieces of budgets. But you have teachers across the country threatening to strike, delaying openings in New York, fighting back, not showing up to work because they're afraid that, they're afraid for their own health, they're afraid for their community's health. But Democrats are still frozen. Listen, Bill de Blasio supported Bernie Sanders, fought. He's a self-declared DSA member. He himself can't even move on this issue, and as well as fight, police unions. But Akela, these are progressive hubs, and if we can't make that kind of progress, and it takes an extraordinary amount of organizing and political exercise for unions to even stand up to the lawmakers that they helped elect, what's going to happen? I think to Napoleon's point, if Democrats can't campaign around this type of organizing, where does that leave us in this election? There's a great opportunity to capture this moment, and it's not being captured.
Well, I think it's interesting because I think so some Democrats that actually believe in this stuff, some of the AOC and members in that cohort kind of, and newly elected members of Congress have kind of campaigned around this. And we see Democrats mirroring this, but actually not having any plans to follow through on promises made to those constituencies. So it's frustrating because you're seeing people actually who have been disengaged from the political process being drawn back in by the promise of, we're going to follow through because you followed through for us, and then being forced to wait over and over again. And so I think, it's a question of how much this is going. I think it's, on the one hand, people are wondering how much is this going to impact non-voters or, in 2020, but also, people, if they end up getting another 4 years of Trump, the party is moving towards a serious fracturing, and there's no sense of what that's going to look like, but we're already seeing it play out in the halls of Congress, both between within the Democratic Party and then obviously between the GOP and the Democrats, to the point where not only can there be no bipartisan movement on this stuff, but even within the parties, there's intense discord and dissatisfaction with what they are actually able to get done, which is actually very little in the scheme of things. So I think the bottom line is voters are going to stop giving, they're going to stop donating their time and money and energy, and whether they put that into a different party is the Democrats' issue to be concerned with at this point.
Napoleon, you said something really about funding, right? So in New York City, right, so you've got Congress, you've got a squad of folks who've been elected now beyond the original squad who are not dependent on corporate funding. They're not dependent on any sort of lobbyist money, whatever it is. It's all individuals who've made up their election. That's how they got to Congress. So they're not beholden to anybody. But in cities, you have progressives, actual progressives. I can only speak to New York, which I know pretty well. You have actual progressives who are unwilling, some of whom aren't even dependent on that money, who are unwilling to fight police unions because they're afraid, the fear that police unions have pushed on folks. Or they're unwilling to champion certain education measures because, maybe a machine brought them into office and they don't want to challenge. So how do we get past? You come, your background is so much in organizing and uniting. Where you're from, the corporate, the corporate system is always trying to pressure whoever's in power to prevent any progress.
Right.
How do we pressure these guys who are supposed to be on our side to do something, to actually have the courage?
Well, it has to be either you're for the people and you're with the people, or either we're not going to support you anymore because they're going to have to grow some cojones. It's like you're going to have to. It's like the future is with that funding where people are funding the politicians and the parties. It's not where with the donors. I believe I'm talking about more long term, and I think they're probably, I don't want to say fake progressives because I don't know them. You know what I'm saying? I don't know what they're thinking or anything like that. But if you're for the cause, you're supposed to move on these issues, or you can't even call yourself a progressive. You know what I'm saying? Because it's clear cut. What we want is very simple. It's not complicated. So we don't have to jump through hoops. If you start to jump through hoops, you're going to feel like you're playing politics and you're actually just trying to be accepted by these guys, you know, by the large donor people, instead of really being coming in for what you said you were going to come in for.
Right. I mean, that's the big lesson here. So on one hand, we have this seismic moment where history could be shifted, our rights could be shifted, everything. On the other hand, we have to pay attention to the local fights. And at the top of the show, we're just coming out of the Majority Report. We talked about specifically, like, if you want to use your energy wisely, if you don't want to invest in making calls for Biden, so be it. Focus on those local races. Focus on the challengers to those who are not showing up, despite the fact that they promised to do so. Napoleon the Legend, thank you for joining. Akela Lacy from The Intercept, thank you for joining. Hope to have you on again very soon. And thank you to everybody. Your patience today. This is our first day back in studio after being on the road. So thank you for your patience at the top of the show. We have a really great show tomorrow. You want to stick around, 3 o'clock Eastern to 4 o'clock. And special thanks to Harvey K, speaking of Harvey K, who's in the chat, for gearing up those likes, and to our Y for the super chat, and of course to our moderators Bob the Mod and Billy Big Bricks for the chat, keeping the chat room honest. Tough times. Gotta say, last time in 2016, I hate that this is a pattern now. This was the toughest part of the race. Getting progressives to see was on. I mean, not everybody's on the same side. We're all fighting with each other, but ultimately, I mean, I believe that that's how fascism wins. They want to divide and conquer us, and it's a really tough time for all of us to have these conversations. So I'm grateful to you all for being honest, for being willing to have these conversations, and to everybody in the chat right now. It's cool to debate. We got to debate this stuff out. So keep it coming. Keep it coming. All right. Thank you all, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks, Nomiki.
Thank you guys. Thank you. You're awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching and listening to The Nomiki Show. But remember to click like and subscribe on YouTube, and please share on social media. If you're not already a patron, please join us for as low as $5 a month on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show for early and special content. That investment makes a huge difference. We are not corporate media raking in the dough. It's really you guys that are keeping us going. So please consider being a patron. And to our current patrons, thank you so much. We are incredibly grateful to you. We also now have swag. So check us out on thenomikishow.com to get your mugs, your totes, and your stickers.